Sonic the Hedgehog 3 rushes into theaters, so it's time to rank all of Sonic franchise, including the Knuckles series, from my least favorite to my favorite. Welcome Cinema, where we focus on a film. I'm Josh, this is Simply Cinema. Let me know down in the comments below, how would you rank the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise? Which you like, and which are you just turned off completely? Let me know all your thoughts on how it relates to the video game in general. Me personally, I haven't really played video games as of recently, not necessarily having a nostalgic connection, so that's just my basis of how I'm judging the movies, just as the simple entertainment that they are. So make sure to like this video if you enjoy it, subscribe if you haven't already to join in the film culture community where we talk about the love of cinema as a whole. And getting in last place, we have the Knuckles series, aka the Wade Show, where it's just not necessarily having the right beats to the pacing. We're getting so much more about Wade the sheriff and the antics that go on through that can almost have its beats taken to the right measure, but ultimately Knuckles should be the highlight of the show. His name is on the forefront, and when he is on the forefront, when we're paying attention to him going about his arc, there's something that can have some fun here and there, some of the best moments for Knuckles. Me personally, not being a huge fan of his character within Sonic the Hedgehog 2 and 3, I enjoy him a bit more within this, at least once we're getting all the action, once it takes away from some of the comedic moments that I just don't particularly jive with. I'm not always a huge fan of comedy, I'm more hit or miss with that, and so this show goes abysmal. It's way too overlong in some sense, but also becomes interesting just to see how weird it gets, just where we're taking Wade and his arc when it should be the Knuckles show. We're following Wade, going about these different things where he's just training to be a warrior and going about this bowling tournament where you have two separate arcs going on at the same time, but the main one is about Wade, which doesn't just necessarily make sense to what you're building about the story, how you're training him to be a warrior when he should be a sheriff deputy, and apparently doesn't have much skills to begin with, even though at the very beginning of the show, they're leading him up to be not a good bowler based on how they show him, but they show him as a good bowler to begin with, so it just doesn't necessarily suit what is all going on with the show. There's some wild things that goes off the rail, almost some good moments here and there, but that's really the best thing I can say about the show. And so that goes into number 3, we have Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Now, while some people may enjoy that we're getting a lot more spotlight on the characters and less on the humans, unfortunately, for me, it's more so the human parts that almost work because it feels so much more ridiculous with what they're doing with the wedding antics, the secret spies invading the wedding, it being a fake wedding, other things that go about along the way, whereas the character moments with Sonic, with Tails, and facing on Knuckles for the first time just doesn't always click in the right way, doesn't have the comedic beats that personally works for me. It goes on this adventure that could be a little bit more extravagant because you're going into all of these new arenas, these different environments that doesn't necessarily take a settlement on what it can do keeping your attention, but unfortunately the comedy really drags us down to where it's pretty dull for me at most of the film. I felt almost like stopping it at certain points, even upon rewatch for what I was getting out of it. It just does not feel like one that clicks. Maybe I'll still give it another try one day, see if it works better for me. But at the time being, all these different character motives, where we get Jim Carrey being the best part, just for his ridiculous nature, he embraces the role as Robotnik, but unfortunately, even him being silly and fitting in the style that can work well with the comedic, exaggerated comedy, mixed in with all the other things, trying to add dramedy within the mix as well, just doesn't always click for me personally. Coming in at number 2, we have Sonic the Hedgehog 1. One that is a solid enough road trip adventure. It does what it needs to. It's understandably a family film that goes about these silly jokes that, for me personally, it feels sidetracked at certain moments. They talk about this being part of the weight of a road. Sonic could technically go really fast, be able to manage all these stakes when it's all going in this simple road trip adventure, but it sort of goes about a way that makes sense, while also creating this human element that can be a hit or miss at times, depending on what you're following along with the characters, how they're building up, how they're expanding on this world. And we almost got something completely abysmal for the look of Sonic, but fortunately, continuing on what they fixed, now we got this whole Sonic franchise because they fixed all that mess of how he looked like before, but just taking it as it is. There's some moments that kind of work for me, honestly. The way they build up this road trip adventure, it may not feel completely like Sonic based on a video game, but of course they're creating their own story. It makes sense to the general gist of what you're taking in. I can get some of the comedic beats, how they're building up the characters, building up the environment, the story as a whole, and so it's just something that goes about with Jim Carrey introducing him. He may not look fully like the purebred Robotnik as he is in the video games, but it's easily passable because I'm so much more used to what they're going about with his character, gradually progressing him throughout the trilogy to become more and more looking like him. And so Jim Carrey still is the spotlight to be had with what we're getting out of this. The silly nature, the exaggerated physical comedy, while also having his own verbal jokes that work effectively to some measure from time to time. Ultimately, this is one that I pop in once in a while, not necessarily all the time, but it is one that I am more favored in rewatching when a new Sonic movie comes out. Which takes me into number 1. We got Sonic the Hedgehog 3. One that was quite a bit of a surprise. Now, it's not a huge blast for me personally. It's not a great movie of all time, but it is a family fun adventure that takes some of the sidetracked moments from Sonic 1 and 2 and manages to remove quite a bit of the human side plots that sort of take away from the story as a whole. There's some narrative beats here and there that can still be a little bit of a miss, especially more toward the first act of the film. It took a little bit to get into the gist of what we're taking the story, but once they begin to add Keanu Reeves as Shadow within this story, yes, there is a familiar villain plot, this origin story that we've seen before, but it still adds an element that, taking it into account within a family film and not necessarily going too dark, but also being having something at stake, getting to understand the villain story, what all is going on in the background. It makes sense where Shadow is coming from. Yes, there are certain things that can feel contrived to the flow of the story, but it was something that, as a family film, it just has a smooth structure, goes about and actually has comedy that quite works a lot for me, and goes about along the way with quite a few great action sequences, especially near the end, different revelations within Sonic as the main character. His character arc makes sense for the way they're shaping the story as it is, changing the narrative, changing the game of the structure of the trilogy, and sort of concluding it off, even though we're knowing we're going to get at least a 4th film in this franchise, but leading it on from there, still being able to feel like this is closed off, especially if Robotnik is gone, giving it a new villain within a new movie or even a new trilogy. What we're getting out of this just manages to has a nice flair to it, where Knuckles, Sonic, Tails, and Shadow just give off their own sort of personas that builds upon the nature of the story, the characters that feel lively for a family film, while giving some purpose to what we're building upon is something that could be so much more than where you're taking this franchise to begin with. So that's just my ranking of the Sonic franchise, including the Knuckles series, from my least favorite to my favorite. Let me know down in the comments below how you would rank the Sonic franchise. Do you like it as a whole, or is it complete flop for you? Let me know all your thoughts. Make sure to like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe if you haven't already to join in the film culture community where we talk about the love of cinema as a whole. So that's just all, and make sure to do yourself a favor and go watch a movie.